Here we are in the new year, 2025, scary, and it's really made me sort of reflect on a number of things, most specifically music. And so today, I'm just going to chat a little bit about that. Having been a musician for my entire life, I've seen a fair bit of stuff going on, and that's what I'd like to share. I have two sons. Sort of what was the catalyst for this is one of my sons plays in a sort of a rock cover band kind of situation, and got hired for a New Year's gig, which I thought was great. You know, he has a day job, obviously, because it's almost impossible to survive as a musician now, and that's sort of a fact. But he has a day job, and he got offered this gig at a sort of a big bar with his five-piece group, right? He was really happy about that. They rehearse regularly, and they've been together now, I guess, for about 2 years, and they've gained a bit of a following, so people come out to see them. And after the gig, I spoke to him on the phone, and I said, so he's in his late 30s now, and I said, so how was the gig? He said, oh, it was great. People loved it, and so on. And I said, so what did you get paid? And he said, oh, $1,000. And I thought, well, that's $1,000. That's pretty good, you know. He said, and I said, that's for you, right? Like just for you. And he said, no, that's for the whole band. So for a whole band that's drawing an audience already, that has a bit of a reputation, they practice every week. They haul a ton of gear where they go, wherever they perform. And they put $200 in their pocket, probably making the value of what they're doing somewhere around $5 an hour, which I'm sorry, I have a bit of a problem with that. Now, what I want to do is just put this in a context, the context of me being an old guy, and having played gigs since the 1960s. Truth be told. And for instance, in 1972, I was thinking back and reflecting on this. In 1972, I was playing in a 7-piece band in Vancouver. We were booked for almost 2 years in advance, and 3 horns in the band. It was a really nice, tight group, and it did everything, just the whole works, like a really wide, eclectic repertoire. And we played all the major hotels, all the major rooms, the whole works. And in 1972, I got $1,000 in my pocket in a 7-piece. So that means the 7-piece probably got, with their expenses and so on, they probably got a check for $7,500 or something. So one would not even want to imagine what that is when corrected for inflation, inflation adjusted over a period of how many years is that? 50? It couldn't be, could it? Yeah, it probably is. So yeah, inflation adjusted, I would guess it was probably more like closer to $20,000 for the night. Can you imagine? Okay, so moving forward, in the 1980s, I played in a couple of different, or 3 different groups, I think. Oh, no, maybe just 2. And it was sort of an average to get paid between $1,500 and $2,000 on New Year's. So again, inflation adjusted, it might be down to like $10,000 now or something. But it really made me reflect, as I said at the top of this video, as to like what's going on. I think this is not boding well for the future of live music, and so I've been involved in live music and other aspects of the music industry for a long time. In the 1980s, the club owners started to negotiate with bands by saying, "Well, if you don't like what I'm paying you, I don't really care. I'll just play MTV in the club, and I just as soon have MTV and the audio coming through the PA system as I would, like to have a band. So, take it or leave it." So, of course, people started just taking it because desperation started to set in. I think around the 80s, even the late 70s with the whole disco scene, where that idea began. Right? Who needs a band? We can just, have music, recorded music, right? So that started to become a serious problem. And so in the 90s, I recorded an original instrumental album that did quite well. And when I say it did quite well, it sort of paid for itself. The cost of producing that album, self-producing that album, was if we were to include our time, would have been about $20,000 to produce that album. One day, I was approached by a woman who owned a restaurant, and she had heard the album and she loved the album, and she said to me, "Gee whiz, fortuitous that I met you today, because I was just listening to your album, and I would love to have that album in my restaurant and play it in the restaurant. I think it's just perfect for the atmosphere that we want to create in the restaurant." And so I gave her a copy of the album, and then she said, "Thank you," and walked away. And so I thought, well, maybe she just didn't have cash on her or something. I mean, I didn't just come right out and say, it's this much. So I thought, well, that's cool. Next time I go into a restaurant, I'll just, ask her. So one day, not long after, I went to the restaurant, and I said to her, and ironically, the album was playing when I went into the restaurant. And so I was happy to see that. All musicians and creative people are happy to have their work shared. And so I said, by the way, you didn't pay me for the album. And she looked at me incredulously and said, "Well, I thought you gave it to me." And that really rang a lot of bells for me, because I realized that this is what music was becoming. It was becoming something that was free. You didn't have to pay for it. It's just something that you shared with other people. So, we spent $20,000 to do this thing that we could just give away as gifts. And in talking to musicians that many of, I knew many, they were all experiencing the same thing. This whole idea that music was just something that you gave away. And I'm not sure. Obviously, I'm not sure how this is going to be accepted on this YouTube channel. Maybe many of you think that's what should happen: is that music should just be given away. Let me. I'm going to just interject in my own thoughts here, just to clarify. For someone like me and many other musicians that I've known, it's taken an education. Now, what an education means is I went to college, and all that money came out of my pocket. I went to some of the best teachers in the country. All of that money came out of my pocket. I never had I had one lesson paid for once in my life, and all of these costs added together would be, well, in the many tens of thousands, right? Many tens of thousands. Not to mention the at least 10,000 hours of practice. Yes, 10,000 hours of practice to become a relatively experienced journeyman player, meaning that you can cross over from one style to another, and do so with some degree of competence. At this point in my life, it's probably much closer to 30,000 hours, and what I don't know what maybe it just takes me a long time to learn or something. In the 90s as well, the late 90s, when there weren't a lot of gigs going on, I took on a choir. I started directing choir. I had a couple of choirs that I directed actually, and at first it was a bit of a learning curve. But my second instrument was always the voice. I studied classical voice, and so I felt very comfortable taking that challenge on, which is when I did take on for about 5 years. When I took on that choir, the first choir, it was about 60 voices. They only had, well, I grew it to 60 voices. They only had photocopied music. They had four filing cabinets, 5-foot high filing cabinets full of photocopied music. But that would mean that no musicians were paid for that music, for the music that they sat for hundreds of hours to arrange, for hundreds of hours to write, for years and years to develop the skill to do that. And no one in that choir understood that, or maybe, though there are other choirs too, of course, but they didn't understand that people had paid for that time, and it wasn't them, right? It wasn't the choir. So they hired me, and I took all that music and burnt it in my backyard. It was quite a revelation for me at the time. And then we built a music library, which eventually was built up to thousands of pieces of music that were all paid for, and where the musicians had an actual return for the work and the education that they had committed to, that they had paid for. In the early 2000s, I had a young student who just went through Christmas, and she got an iPhone, and she was just absolutely thrilled that she had got an iPhone. And in our little post-Christmas conversation, I said, "Wow, that's cool." I wasn't even using an iPhone at that time, or any kind of phone. I sort of wish that I wasn't now. And she informed me gleefully that she had downloaded 3,000 tunes onto her iPhone. So I said to her, in my ignorance and innocence, how much did you pay for that? And she laughed at me as if I was making a joke. I'm serious. I was making a joke. She had 3,000 tunes on her iPhone, her favorite tunes, and she didn't pay a nickel for any one of them. Now, how does that work? How does it work that the reason she wanted an iPhone was so that she could download her 3,000 favorite songs and listen to them whenever she wanted? And how is it that iPhone and the manufacturers wouldn't have a problem with that? I imagine that still takes place now. Maybe it doesn't anymore. Let me know in the comments. I had a sax player friend. He's a great sax player. He actually did 10 albums. I'm not going to use names. And he did 10 albums. He was a Toronto guy. And he played with some of the best players in the country. And eventually, we used to run a music school as well. And he taught for us, and eventually he just couldn't make it work anymore. He couldn't get the gigs that were necessary to bring up a family. He had 2 young children at that point, so he joined the military and went through basic training in his late 30s, so that he could play in the military band and get paid. That I think is a rather interesting anecdote. I've got hundreds. Don't worry, I won't share them with you. somebody called me from a winery once. This was about in 2007, I think, or something like that. 2010, maybe. No, I'm probably closer to. No, actually, maybe even later. Yeah. Anyway, 2000 something, 12 or something like that. And they said to me, "Oh, we've heard you play." I had this gig at a weekly gig, a house gig at a hotel. "Oh, we heard you play, and wow, gee, we'd really love to have you at the winery." And I said, "Well, do you have a place to set up?" And "Oh yeah, we have a gazebo, and it overlooks a beautiful orchard and so on." I thought, well, gee, this sounds like, this sounds really nice. Okay, what's your budget? I said to him. Well, she said, we'll give you, if we could have a trio, just like you have in the hotel, that would be great. And we'd like to give you each a bottle of wine, and you can have cheese and crackers, and we'll pay you $50. That was split between us, right? So, coming from where I'm coming from at that point, I hung up on her, by the way. I said, never call me again. And that's sort of the way I started feeling about a lot of gigs, right? A lot of gigs. When I first moved to Victoria, BC, I was sort of the new guy on the block in some cases, and I played at this one restaurant. And I won't name the restaurant. It was like where everybody wants to play. And at the end of the night, I was given $35, and I was playing with the best players in the city. So I said, what's this? And I said, well, that's what we're getting paid it was $120 or something, I don't know, between us. I said, are you kidding me? No, they weren't. And they were all falling for this, and so were all of the other musicians in that city at that point. And I've heard similar stories in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver now as well, across the country. I'm obviously a Canadian, and so that got me to the point where I wasn't taking the guitar out of my case anymore. To play gigs like that, and I didn't play gigs like that. Instead I asked always, what am I getting paid? This is my bottom line. I refuse to go lower, and I'll get a job before I do this. And I just have a little note here. That's why I'm looking at it. There's a few things I didn't want to forget. I just recently called the plumber, and the plumber wanted to charge me about $105 or something before they did any work. Just to get to my door, right? They're going to charge me $105. So the question becomes, what's going on? What's going on with how we value music? What's going on with how we value the creative process? In our culture, if we're going to have one at all. We're living in a world where Spotify programmers are making 10 times what the musicians make while making their product. We live in a world where an entertainer, I use the word very carefully, an entertainer like Taylor Swift is a billionaire, whereas journeyman musicians who have their 10 or 20 or 30,000 hours of work and education can't make $50 a night. That's a problem, and it's a problem for our entire society. The same, I think, goes for the education process right now. I know that in this country, Humber College, Humber Music Program just closed down, which was understood to be the best music program in this country. Well, it now no longer exists, and with all of the professors that were teaching in that program, that no longer exists. The same also happened at the Vancouver Island University. Where they had a stellar program, and with some of the best teachers and performers nationally. They're out of work. now, as teachers anyway. But beyond that, the venues are a real problem. There is virtually, the players that are left that are trying to keep their chops in shape, and are trying to use their skills, can't find a place to do it anymore because it's just not practical. A saxophone player that I know of opened a restaurant in Vancouver that was considered to be a really great little jazz club. And he eventually packed in the jazz club because he said it was no longer about the music; it was just about running a restaurant. And I could really appreciate that. I saw the great Lenny Bro in George's Spaghetti Factory in Toronto, and I thought, the whole place was just clanking plates and slurping sounds, while one of the greatest guitar players ever to be on this planet was barely being heard in the corner. So back to the 2025 happy message. Oh man, so back to the 2025 happy message. Here we are looking down at the face, which probably is going to pretty soon become a face of AI, and if you don't think that that's going to affect every aspect of our daily lives, including the music arts, including the visual arts, including the literary arts, you haven't been paying attention. And it's a scary world that we're looking at right now. Rather than employing more people in the arts, it's going to take that away from I don't know how much it'll be reduced, but given what I know, it's going to have a devastating effect. So I'm just again looking at this. So to just close, in the 1960s, when I decided to play, decided to be a musician, foolishly, a young guy, thinking that the world was his oyster and, I'm just so good that everyone's going to appreciate it. There was some degree of appreciation there for a while. And in the 1960s, any club you went in had a live band, right? And those live bands were in many cases original and great and exciting, and it created an entire culture. Of course, it was during a cultural revolution, there was much about that cultural revolution that was likely negative. But one thing I can say about the creative aspects of the cultural revolution in the 1960s and early 70s, I would say too, is that there was music that has never again come to that point. Creatively, that it did in the 1960s and early 1970s. We still hear that music on the radio. People are still making bundles of money from turning that music over and over and over again. I just watched a movie a couple of nights ago that used an entire 1960s soundtrack, and it had nothing to do with the 1960s from a timeline perspective. In 2025, we have manufactured idols while our orchestras are dying. Music is streaming, and musicians are getting paid nothing for it. I think what we are witnessing is the demise, not of one style of music, not of pop music or gypsy jazz music or jazz or country. We're watching the demise of music. And how does that happen? It happens when musicians aren't paid. That's how it happens. When musicians can't realize a life where they're paid as any other journeyman would be paid. And the reason they aren't is, well, I guess maybe you can say supply and demand. But I just wanted to get this off my shoulders today because after having played for a lifetime, we're in bad shape. Not only musically but culturally, we're in really bad shape, and there are ramifications to that cultural degradation that we are now experiencing. Cultures are made enlivened and made rich by what we produce in terms of the arts, whether it be books, whether it be paintings, whether it be visual art or music, and what we're getting now is just a mess. I mean, if I hear one more boy band or manufactured idol, I think I'm going to lose my mind. So just consider the music that was happening in the 50s, consider the music that was happening in the 1960s, and ask yourself about value. Like, what is value? What does it mean to value something? What does it mean when we use the word quality? What does it mean when we use the word excellence? I'll leave you with that. I think I better stop now. And that was a bit of a rant. And, I think I deserved one. Thank you. Happy New Year. And I hope you can find a venue where you can go out and hear a good band.